Thank you everyone for joining us this evening on Sunday night. Hopefully you've enjoyed a day of football or whatever your passion is. We're very fortunate tonight to have a guest that Connor and I were invited to his lab at his company, a significant life sciences lab that does some really cool stuff, which we're not going to say much about because he's going to introduce himself. He's both a UMaine engineer and a UMaine MBA and very proud of it. And so he spent some time with us in his lab earlier this week. And I think, and we have some stuff to wrap it into why understanding what the day in the life of a CEO looks like to wrap it up. But without further ado, I think Connor, unless you have anything to add, I think we should get right to Ross's presentation, and all the intros and stuff are in the presentation. So enjoy. Good evening, everyone. Welcome to our second Dean's Huddle of this academic year. Thanks for joining us. Today, I'm very, very excited to have a CEO and an alumni of the MBA program here to talk with us today. So tonight's topic is around the life of a CEO. We're going to learn a little bit about Ross and his background. His background is quite impressive. So I've gotten to know Ross over the last year and a half or so. We're actually live close together and do run together, which is kind of fun. He's a UMaine engineer. He's a UMaine MBA, as I mentioned, and has got an incredible career history that we're going to talk about. He's been away from Maine for a lot, just recently came back. He's CEO of this organization. He's led organizations in Japan and other parts of Asia, and most recently in California. So we're lucky to have him back in the state, that's for sure. And he's leading Yokogawa Fluid Imaging, which is a really interesting story, which he's going to tell, a life sciences organization right here in Scarborough in the greater Portland area. So welcome, Ross. Maybe tell us a little bit about the company, your background, anything I missed, and say hi to our MBA viewers.
Great. Well, thank you, Norm. It's an honor and a pleasure to have you and the University of Maine and the Graduate School of Business here at our facility. As Norm mentioned, I'm Ross Bryant, President and CEO of Yokogawa Fluid Imaging Technologies. We are a Maine company, celebrated our 22nd anniversary just this past year. Born out of Booth Bay, Maine, and a privately held company for many years, and just recently, in the last couple of years, was acquired by Yokogawa, a very large multinational Japanese firm. As Norm mentioned, I was in California prior to this, and have lived in Japan myself and have experience there, and excited to be back here in the state of Maine.
Wonderful. And Ross also speaks some Japanese and knows the culture well, hence the nice fit with this organization, I think. So let's kick it off with a question a bit about your role as a CEO. I think this is a goal for a lot of the people that are going to listen today. And tell us about what's a typical day in the life look like for Ross Bryant, and maybe some of the challenges that you're facing.
Sure. Yeah, great, Norm. Certainly one of the difficulties in these times, right, is there's a lot of uncertainty and a lot of turbulence, right? And that really drives what I'm doing now. And it's really around three areas: supply chain, labor, and most recently around currency fluctuation, right? And what that has meant ultimately is, my role has had to be less strategic and more tactical as we fight these challenges and fight these fires. So, take supply chain, for example. We, prior to these supply chain issues, had a number of wonderful lean initiatives around improving operational excellence and productivity. But all of that sort of has had to take a back seat as we deal with day-to-day challenges on supply chain, right? Either delays, product quality issues, supplier parts issues, quality there. And so we've just had to fight numerous fires. So just had to be very tactical because of these supply chain disruptions. And I guess in addition to that, even my engineering team, who you wouldn't think would necessarily need to be involved in operations, many of my engineering staff have had to put new product development initiatives on hold because we're trying to source other components and need to qualify those vendors, re-engineer some of our internal components of our products, and so on and so forth. And so again, needing to pivot and just fight the day-to-day, and so that's put some of our product development schedules on hold, or have pushed back the schedules. Labor is another big one. I mean, everybody talks about it, of course. For us, just trying to grow the business, and at the rate at which we're trying to grow, a lot of that is now limited by our ability to find talent, right? Not just here in the state of Maine, but globally as we continue to expand our business. And then lastly, as I mentioned, currency. So that's been a big one. Over half of our business is done outside the United States. And everyone has seen is what's happened with currency and exchange rate fluctuations. And so that's been a new fire that I'm currently battling.
All challenges, and it sounds like a daunting task. So give us an example, just as a follow-up of a typical day. I know there probably isn't one, but when a CEO, give everyone a bit of a flavor. So you arrive here, I'm sure very early in the morning, and you stay till late, and we're probably taking you away from your work right now. Are you connecting with Japan? How much time are you spending in the lab? You're also a scientist yourself. Like, how much time is in meetings? Give us an idea of what does a CEO deal with? I'm sure it's like a fire hose, but what's a typical day if there is one?
Sure. So we operate off a strategic business plan, right? That drives our business not only for the 12-month period, but out to 3 years. And so that drives a lot of how I think about what my responsibilities are and how we operate. And innovation is key to what we do, what we have done, and what we hope to do in the future. So I'm constantly looking in with our new product development group to see what's happening on the innovation side, and are we keeping schedule with these new product initiatives. And then yes, I'm touching base with Japan almost on a daily basis with the parent organization to communicate with them, but then also our global offices. And so the European situation is obviously challenged, I think much more so than here in the US at the moment. So our European headquarters is based in Germany, and working with those folks to understand what their needs are and the turbulence that they're facing.
Wonderful, that's great. Well, back to the first question, you talked about some of the challenges. Let's flip it around and talk about some of the exciting things, the opportunities. Talk to us about what you're seeing kind of at the Maine level, national level, and a global level.
Sure. Well, I mean, certainly one of the things that's really exciting about our business is we do really important things, right? We're helping solve some of the world's biggest challenges with our technology, right? And so, as you mentioned, we're really we're an instrumentation company, but we serve the life science market. And so when you think about that, it's biopharmaceutical development. So we played a role in COVID vaccine development, right? And the characterization of the COVID vaccine for those that manufactured that product. We are in the water quality monitoring business. And so I think everybody understands what it means to have not only clean drinking water, but also clean rivers, streams, lakes, and oceans. So that's really exciting, right? And highly motivating, not just for me, but for all of our staff, right? That there's a real purpose behind what we do. So that said, looking at, what are some of the things sort of within Maine, nationally and internationally, I think on the Maine side, we have an opportunity to really continue to grow and expand our business. And as not only a UMaine alum in the engineering school and the business school, but also probably a fourth or fifth generation Mainer, right? I'm really committed to having us here and continuing to grow our business and scale our business here in the state of Maine. And so, although we do little business here, in terms of commerce and selling our instruments, there's a real opportunity to partner with the state to help us continue to make this our home. It has been our home for 22 years, and hope to make it our home for the next 20. But also for the state to help us with labor, right? Our needs are unique, right? Finding highly qualified scientists and engineers and business folks is not easy. So partnering with the state and institutions and programs like yourself to make sure that we have the labor available so that we can grow the business here in the state the way we want it. And then nationally and internationally, it's continued to expand on what we're doing. Over half our business is outside the U.S., and we continue to scale and grow that. and using the state of Maine, using Scarborough specifically as our headquarters for doing that.
That's exciting. Hey, I'm going to guess it's a question that a lot of people are having that I do. When you talked about the water quality monitoring, if I got that right, and that's very interesting and wonderful thing. Tell us about how technological has that become? Don't give us any trade secrets, but what are you doing there, and how are you working with organizations, I'm serving as governments and others to help tell us a bit about that, because I'm sure there's going to be a lot of interest from our
Sure, absolutely. Well, it probably starts with talking a little bit about our core technology. Okay. So our core technology is imaging microscopy. It's a fancy way of saying automated microscope. Okay. Right. So we took what has traditionally been a manual microscope and built a very highly automated system. And so when you think of microscope, you're typically thinking of looking at very, very small things, right? And so in the industry, we refer to that as subvisible. Right, and so there's a lot of concern and interest around what's in the water at a microscopic level, things that you can't see, right? That could be a nuisance or could be toxic, right? And so that's the value that we provide to, let's say, municipal water facilities who are providing drinking water to residential and commercial facilities, or the lakes that you swim in, or the ocean for our fish, and so on and so forth, making sure that those ecosystems at the microscopic level are vibrant and diverse, but also free of contaminants or these other things that can be, of detriment to society.
I think our 50 or so sustainability majors in the MBA are going to be happy to hear that answer. Let's flip to the students for a little bit. And you've got an incredible background, a great success story as an MBA. What advice might you offer to someone who's doing their MBA right now? And as you know, we've got a variety of students of differing ages, some our ages, some Sure. younger, some even older than us, different backgrounds. It's a wonderful degree that leads places, but what advice would you give to how to leverage their degree
Sure.
going forward?
Yeah, I think at the most basic level, the fundamentals are important, right? So, really understanding, finance and understanding how to read an income statement properly and a balance sheet, right? So I think that's an important basis. Understanding how to use the various tools of marketing and understanding that in market research. So the foundation is key. What's become increasingly more important, though, from my perspective and the MBAs that we hire, is around leadership and leadership qualities, right? And not only acting as a leader, but how do you engage your teams and groups that you lead, right? So that's very important. Analytics and data science has become a huge part, and that really wasn't part of my MBA 20 plus years ago, but it's become so important today because there's so much data available, given that we're on such a digital platform, especially with our business, right? And so how do you pull all of this information together that resides in all of these different places and turn it into something that's very useful? And then the other piece that's become important, especially here recently, is resiliency as it relates to crisis management, right? And being able to pivot and adjust in such an uncertain world. So those things weren't as prevalent when I was doing my MBA. It was more the sort of the foundational piece, and that's important and matters. But these elements of leadership, of data science, data analytics, big data, and this idea of resiliency and being able to work through challenging situations is becoming increasingly important.
That's great. One thing you'll be happy to hear is the most popular concentration with the MBA, the MaineMBA, is analytics with almost 100 students.
I can imagine.
A lot of them are interested in that, and I think well, you make a really neat point I'd like to get your comment on is the majority are working full time, and this has become the majority in the United States now. Unlike us, we quit our jobs and did our MBAs and accumulated some debt. They're working and doing it online in hybrid environments. So how would you think you could, if you've got your regular job, you're doing your MBA at night, and I'm lasering in on that leadership piece you talked about, which is really challenging to do in a kind of a classroom environment, or if you're in a very specific task-oriented job, which a lot are. What kind of things would you advise that they might be able to build some of those leadership qualities that you talk so well about? Is there anything you'd suggest?
Yeah, it's tough because some of it is through self-learning, as you mentioned. A lot of it isn't textbook. I guess for me, I've done it through learning from others, right? So finding a good mentor or set of mentors, right, who really exhibit and really live that leadership life, right? And so I guess that would be my advice, is to try to find those individuals who really, not only, I think, to me, being a good leader is a lot of what I focus on here is around employee engagement, right? How can I bring the team up? So it's not about this idea, maybe old school idea of you have the leader and everybody else, right? But how can I bring everyone together in a way that we have highly engaged, highly motivated, right, individuals to better our business, and especially a business like ours, but I'm sure most too for the students. We've got some really talented and smart people, right? So the more I can engage them and the more that I can get out of them and have them lead, just the better the business we're going to be.
Before we let you go, this has been great. Maybe you could give some last words of advice, something from your background, from fluid imaging, your experiences for our audience tonight.
Great. Yeah, thanks, Norm. And I think what I'll do is I'll go back to how we started the conversation and talk a little bit about my background and the diversity of my background and how valuable I think that is, and the diversity of the experiences that I've had, right? So I started my career as an engineer, right, and master's degree in material science and MBA, and worked in a very technical environment for quite some time, and then had the opportunity to go live overseas, and I took advantage of that. And gained a wonderful experience in doing that and being in that environment, and then transitioned more into business and commercial facing roles. So I guess my advice would be, just based on my experience and my career development, all of that has made me a better CEO, I think a better business leader, and a better person within a business environment. And so I guess what I'm saying is for your students who are listening tonight, it would be, take advantage of all the opportunities to build a very diverse and broad resume and set of experiences. It has served me very well. I feel like I can communicate effectively across the organization. I feel like I can communicate effectively with our offices and business partners all over the world. And so I've never shied away from taking advantage of those opportunities, and I think that broad background and set of experiences has served me very well.
Wonderful. Thank you very much.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Great.
Hopefully you enjoyed hearing from Ross as much as we did when we went there, and Connor and I actually spent probably a good hour afterwards talking to him and touring around, and you can see some of the pieces that Connor put in the video, which is wonderfully well done, of the background and the technology that they have. So just a couple of very quick things here from me, and then we'll open it up to any questions you might want to ask about the role of a CEO and what it is. This is obviously our second huddle. Just wanted to show our lovely graphic that Connor has done up, and we heard from him, and then this quick summary. So just a few things to kind of take away and think about. You might be saying, well, why the heck do I care? What's the life of a CEO, and why is it worth listening to him? I think there's amazing, his comments on the trends. Obviously, he's got his fingers on the pulse of all those things, like from currency changes to inflation to talent, all those things that he talked about. Very, very interesting. The technology they do is wonderful. But beyond that, in general, what do you take away from that? Well, here's just a couple of brainstorm thoughts that we thought we would share with you. And the first one is, a lot of you probably might want to be one, right? And so pretty interesting to hear from somebody, because it is not an easy job, right? Think of the things he's balancing and the stresses he's under. As you heard there, his company is owned by a large Japanese conglomerate. That's why they specifically picked him out and hired him to lead this company in Maine, got him back from California back to where he was from. Think of the challenges there. They're a multi-billion dollar organization with operations all over the world, really challenging. And then you're kind of the vehicle down to the staff below. You all work for one now. Sometimes we call them executive directors or other terms, presidents for organizations of different sizes. But somebody at the end of the day is responsible for the resource, operations, and management decisions that are tough to make. The ones that mean people get less or people get more, or certain people get advantaged over other people, or certain business units or ideas people want to do may or may not be supported. At the end of the day, the buck stops with that person. They work for, it depends on the situation. This is very generic, but typically you, in the private sector, they would report into the ownership group. Sometimes they are the owner. We'll talk about that in a second, but or they're responsible to someone who takes all of the financial risk, or in a not-for-profit context. And some large publicly traded organizations, it will be a board of directors. So some group that may be volunteers or elected that makes the decisions of what they want to do. So they're the single person that all below them, yet above them. In professional sport, this is the commissioner, right? The commissioner is the term we use to talk about a CEO. So a really challenging position between that group that takes the risk, owns, or is elected to manage that organization, and then all the staff and the activities below it. I think all of us, I think I would be just as guilty of this as anybody, probably underestimate how hard it is. We know these people are well paid, they get lots of attention, their staff look up to them, but it, as you heard from him, it is a busy, challenging job with many different activities. And you kind of go away from being, in his case, a scientist with specific expertise, and now you're responsible for the whole breadth of the operation. And the last 2 points there, which are, because the CEO is typically the highest paid person in the organization. Well, not in a university, it's the football coach, but in most places, it's the highest paid position in the university, right? Or in the organization. And they're challenging. But as you see, and if you read all the research that's done on CEOs, they almost always, unless they're the owner operator, turn over. The really successful ones may last 5 or 6 or 7 years. Sometimes they're fired. Sometimes they just run out of gas. Sometimes it's a change of strategic direction. But it's much like a head coach of a professional sports club. You are paid very well, but you know there's a short-term duration to your particular position, unlike other fields or other jobs in an organization where you may expect to leave on your own terms and maybe retire from that particular place. And then lastly, the one below is when they are the owner, and this is an important point, and a lot of you work in some of these or will work in some of these contexts. When it's a smaller business, maybe an agency, maybe a startup, the CEO or the president is also probably and often the person who's putting in a lot of their own income or investment. I mean, often cases they're putting a startup on their own lines of credit to keep people paid because they can't have their staff leaving. When the business gets under pressure, they're taking on the financial responsibility for every one of their staff, their children, their scholarship funds. The pressure is enormous. Now, as we put in brackets there, the reward is also significant because they will benefit more than everybody else when it goes. When you put it in the context of the fact that less than 10% of startup ventures in the United States ever go to market or are successful, you do have to respect the people that can take on those particular positions. So I think you got a lot of the kind of specific background and details from Ross. We wanted to kind of package it together and have some takeaways for you when you think about what it means as an MBA to think about, hey, do I want to do this? Certainly going to work for these people. You're going to be very close to them as you move up the ladder in your particular organizations, in your particular fields. So it's pretty important to have a bit of an understanding. And that was the idea of the topic for tonight. So with that, Connor, I think if people have some, we would certainly take a few questions. And if not, we're certainly welcome to let everyone enjoy the rest of their Sunday evening.
Sure, Norm. I actually just had one from obviously filming with you guys and watching that video over a lot. I kept having this one question come to mind just based on the fact of Ross's background. Obviously, very strong science background that blends nicely with obviously the field of which the company he's the CEO of. Do you find that more often than not, the CEO of the organization typically has experience with that exact industry, or is that actually not the norm when it comes to finding placement for that position?
Yeah, great question. And certainly in the life sciences, and this is just based on what I've read and seen. it's almost essential. And one of the things that he talked about offline, and you certainly were there, Connor, was in Europe, a lot of the life science CEOs are double doctorates. So they're expecting you to have a doctorate in science and a doctorate in business to become the CEO of a major biopharma or any life sciences. So in that world, you really need kind of the street cred, right, of understanding the science, even though he's not practicing it anymore. When he gets in the room with, extremely smart people who are studying some very specific piece, as he mentioned, I mean, they were involved with the testing procedure for the temperatures of the COVID vaccine. You can't be making mistakes, right, on those kind of contracts, right? So he has the credibility where if you didn't have that in that field, really challenging. Now, could we say in another field, maybe, you get away with it if you don't have as much specificity, if it's not as technical? Perhaps on your own you could do it, or you could learn and work up to it. It's just like being a dean of a university school or faculty. Before you can get there, you have to kind of be a full professor. So you kind of have to earn your stripes. Now, is it essential for the job? You could argue yes or no. But I think from the perspective of someone who needs to work into that and understands that and has the credibility with external constituents is very, very important. And so that's kind of what he said. And I think from what we've seen and what we've read.
Okay, great. Thank you.
So I think if you flip that around, it's a great question. If you flip that around for any of you, and we've talked about this in our career development sessions before, the idea is being, what's the kind of the currency? So if you do want to be a CEO, when I said that first takeaway point, say, yeah, that's me. I want to lead an organization. I want that job. You got to look back and say, well, what are the pieces I need to have? So you saw him, he has his engineering background, scientist for a long time, MBA, work his way up in the business and research development side, boom, gets a shot to be a CEO, right? So what are the pieces that I kind of need to have to get there? And in certain industries, it might be learning some languages, which we've talked about before, or adding a certain designation or a certain training or a certain experience. For instance, most people that want to be a chief marketing officer, it's almost essential that at some point in your career, you've done a sales job and that you've done a market research job. So whatever your goal is for these leadership positions, it's a great question, Connor. Figure out exactly what they are. And you got a long runway to get there. I mean, he's late 40s, right? So you get to be there. That takes a while to get there. And so you can think about it in that context as you pull it away from your own professional development. Anyone else have anything they would like to ask or talk about?
I can go for one question, Norm.
Great, thanks.
Was there anything in your discussion that surprised you based on either the industry, his role from working left coast and right coast, or Japan, or just him being a Mainer and then moving away? Was there anything in general to his background that surprised you that you thought was different than other CEOs you've dealt with?
Yeah, I mean, I've had the good fortune of I run with him, so I get to talk to him quite a bit, and he's quite a fast runner, so I like to make him talk. But one of the things that really came across, great question, was this focused effort of the company when they sought him out. So I think this is a really interesting takeaway that I got thinking about, more for you all, that if you're thinking about this as a CEO where you want to go, they don't post these jobs on, Indeed, right? They may have to throw it up there, but they're not hiring there. When they're picking someone to lead their organization and they're putting all the risk on the line, there's a board of directors and owners, they're targeting people. And he had those pieces we talked about before, to Connor's question, but also he spoke Japanese. He's worked in Japan, I think 7 years, whatever he said, he lived there, understands the culture, which is completely different, yet is also an American, had worked in California, got the street cred of Silicon Valley and all that stuff, and was willing to come back to Maine, which a lot of people, he said very few people come back to Maine from California when they get there. He was willing to do that. So when they're targeting and thinking about these jobs, they're focused on who exactly they want. You think about a D1 athletic program hiring a new coach, right? They're not putting out resumes. They're targeting specific people they know who can fit the job and those skills. That was interesting for me, and how important those cultural and global experiences were and language abilities were for them in that kind of hiring. The second thing I would add to your question was you heard him talk about the currency fluctuations and these things. And often we think about that from an investment perspective, but has comments about the challenges when you're in the country where the currency is roaring, right? So the US economy is outperforming so many economies around the world right now and has been for a couple of years. That's amazing for everyone with investments, US dollars. But when your customers are earning their dollars or getting their grants or whatever it is in a different currency, it's hugely problematic because all of a sudden your prices have gone up for them 10, 15, 20%, but nothing's changed for you. And I thought that was a really interesting comment he made. And often we don't think, I think that's intuitive, but you often don't think about that in a global business. So those would be two that kind of came, were good learnings, at least from the discussion.
Appreciate it.
Thank you. All right. Is there anyone else? And then we'll certainly, like we always do, we'll stop the recording. And if anyone wants to talk about anything offline that isn't being recorded, we can do that afterwards. So, all right. Well, thank you everyone for listening. And I know Ross was really excited about this, and we're going to package this all together and share it with all of your hundreds of classmates. And hopefully it will get well followed. And I think there was a lot of really, really useful stuff that he shared. So thank you, Ross. And thank you everyone for joining us tonight.